everyone. This is Jyotsna Hegde with NRI Pulse. Joining us today is Ashwin Ramaswami, who recently launched his campaign for the Democratic nomination of State Senate in Georgia's 48th District. Ashwin is a Johns Creek native and second-generation immigrant with a career in public service and advocacy. He has technical and entrepreneurial background of working with nonprofits, startups, and small businesses. As a civil servant, Ashwin served at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency on cybersecurity and election security, working with state and local election offices to secure the 2020 and 2022 elections. Ashwin also worked as a fellow in the Georgia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Ashwin attended public schools in Johns Creek, Georgia. He has a bachelor's degree in computer science from Stanford University, and if elected, will take office with a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. Ashwin, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome.
Good to meet you, Jyotsna. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get right to it, Ashwin. So tell us, what motivated you to run for Georgia's State Senate 48th District?
Yeah, so I was born and grew up here in Johns Creek, and I've really benefited a lot from everything the people and the place has given me, whether it's the community, Indian American community, whether it's the folks I grew up with in middle school and high school, whether it's other opportunities I had through education and teachers. And it's really made a difference in my life. And what I want to do is to make sure that everyone else has the same or better opportunities as I had. My background is, my parents both came here from India. They're both from Tamil Nadu. And they both work in IT, which inspired me when I was a very young age to start learning computer science and learning coding. And one thing I started doing was that I loved building tools and applications that would help nonprofits and other organizations. I was very involved in a group called Chinmaya Mission, which is a spiritual organization supporting the program called Balavihar, where they teach ages K through 12 about Hindu values, philosophy, chanting, and things like that. What I always learned from there is that it's really important to give back to your community. We always say something which is giving more than what we take, and that we shouldn't just take from the community. We need to give back to really help out afterwards. So that's why afterwards, after I graduated, I went to Stanford and studied computer science. But I always thought about ways I could really give back to my community in public service. I didn't want to work at a tech company, even though you can make lots of money and be very successful that way. For me, my heart was always in public service, which is why I went to DC and started working in the federal government on election security. That felt like a much better use of my talents, because we needed people to keep our elections secure in 2020 and also 2022. That's also where I finished a law degree and realized the benefits of really having a diverse and wide background in these kinds of fields. I think what the other incident which made me really interested in this position here was that the current state senator where I'm from, his name is Sean Still. He got criminally indicted for trying to overturn the 2020 elections. When I saw that, I realized that we need to have people in public office who understand the importance of democracy, the importance of our vote, and are not willing and who are willing to stand up for what's right, not people who are just doing what's politically expedient. So that's when I realized my background is essentially the opposite of that. I was a civil servant working to secure our elections, and I saw the danger of politicized politicians who are just taking what work you're doing and using it for their own ends. That's not a good thing. We need to have people who respect the facts and do respect the people's right to vote. So that's all what kind of made me interested in running for this seat here.
Well, you talked about your background in technology and also in public service. So how do you believe your skills and background sort of specifically sort of qualify you for this role?
Yeah, I think a few things. One is when I was in the federal government, I worked at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which works on protecting our nation's critical infrastructure from cybersecurity attacks and other kinds of threats as well. Note that CISA was actually created under President Trump in 2018. And when I was first working there, I was working under the Trump administration on important work to secure our nation. Afterwards, I was working under President Biden. But I've had the experience of working in the government under both Republican and Democratic administrations in order to get things done. So I have the experience of being able to bridge those two sides and really focus on what's needed. The second thing is, you mentioned like technology, law, and policy. My background being in computer science and technology means that my background really straddles the different areas which are really important, whether it's law and policy over in DC in the federal level, whether it's working in the AG's office at the state level in Georgia, and also working in entrepreneurship and technology in the Bay Area. I think I would be the first member of the state Senate with a computer science degree, which might sound shocking, but it's true because a lot of people with my background don't think of getting into politics. But as we're facing lots of issues around things like AI regulation, data privacy, keeping children safe online on social media. A lot of issues are involving more and more technology things. And I think we really need someone who understands those issues to really have a voice at the table here.
Absolutely. So your campaign, Ashwin, has raised 108,000 at the time of the launch. So how do you plan to utilize these funds to sort of, to support your campaign goals, efficiently?
Yeah, one thing I would note is, just to start, is I'm very grateful with all the community support. It was raising $108,000 was a big effort, but it was only possible because there were so many folks in the community who knew me and believed Ashwin is the right person for the job, and let me put my money behind him. It is only a start.
I'm just curious, how old are you?
I am 24 years old.
You're probably going to be one of the youngest senators, along with many other firsts too. Go ahead.
Yes, I would be youngest state senator at the moment. I would be the first Gen Z. Mm-hmm. But I would note, if you look at the history of our nation, when during the time of the founding fathers, people who were in state senators or people who are in Congress were in their 20s and at an early age. So it's harkening back to an older tradition. And I think what's happened since then is that there's all these financial barriers and other kinds of issues where only older, wealthy people are able to run for elected office, which is why I think it's even more important to do this kind of work.
Sorry, I distracted you from your earlier question. Please go ahead.
Good thing, yeah. But I would say, yeah, the $100,000 on 108K is only a start. These races are, unfortunately, the reality is that it's very expensive. But what we're going to do now with this is we're going to use it to, first of all, build out our team. We need to make sure that we have folks who are helping us with the campaign, whether it's talking to voters, whether it's placing advertisements, and it's also just hosting events around the district and around in Georgia, because a lot of people don't know what a state senate is or what a state senator does. And a lot of what we're trying to do is educate people on these issues, because these are issues that really impact each of our lives, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, all these other issues as well. And if we can't just focus on the federal level, we need to also think about what can the state level do for us. So that's a lot of where these resources will come towards.
So how do you plan to, engage the community and enlist its support for your candidacy?
Yeah, so I think one part of this is that because I grew up in the community, there are a lot of folks who know me from a very young age, and they know my morals and my values. So one example is I went to public schools in the area, OC Elementary, Taylor Road Middle School, Chattahoochee High School. So there are teachers there, former classmates, people I worked with in the community who know me pretty well there. Also went to Fulton Science Academy Charter School. So there's a lot of different communities there from various backgrounds who know about me and can really vouch for me, but it's also an opportunity for me to go and serve them back because of all they've helped me. And I mentioned before Chinmaya Mission. I've been involved in South Asian organizations in that way as well. So my plan is to also engage them and say, here's why you should care about what's going on in your state Senate, state legislature. And I think the last thing I want to do is really think about how do we build bridges between communities, which I'm already a part of, and other communities. And one area where I plan to do more of is this idea of like interfaith organization. This is something which I've done in the past. Being a Hindu myself, I think it's really important for us to engage with and to understand the issues that other communities are facing. Because one thing I've realized is that we're actually we're not that different. A lot of the issues we face are similar. So one thing I really plan to do is making sure we're talking with the Christian community, the Muslim community, Jewish, all the other communities of faith here, and people who maybe not follow a particular faith either. I think that's really important, because what we need to do is we need to be able to go to the places where people are gathering and be able to tell them, here's the vision, but not only that, saying, how can I help you? Because that's ultimately the goal of what we're doing.
So, earlier you talked about how, you were motivated by, your opponent, Sean Still, to sort of take on this race. So what key values do you bring to the table that sets you apart from your opponent, Sean Still?
Yeah, I would say three things. One is integrity. The second is energy. And the third is unity. So start with integrity. Public servants, our goal is to fully represent our constituents. And also we need to preserve, protect, and defend our democracy. So my opponent did not do that. He put his political interests first over the will of the Georgia voters. So that's something I'm very much committed to. And it's not only something that I learned from working in public service, but it's something I learned from my own religious upbringing. Being a Hindu, learning about the values in the Bhagavad Gita, or even as later on when I started learning about other religions, like all of these faith traditions talk about the importance of being honest and being one in thought, word, and deed. So that's one thing that's really important for me, and I would never forsake that. The second is energy. I come from a very unconventional background. I'm young. I come from a tech background. I'm not entrenched in the political scene for decades, as some of these other people are. And I would bring a new perspective to the state legislature. I think it's important to have people who have been around for a while, but we need to complement that with people with new ideas. So that's the other idea there. And there are just these, because I'm young and have grown up in the district, there's a lot of things that I've lived in my own experience. For example, going to schools here, having to deal with the traffic or like all the things that happen when you're growing up here, which my opponent hasn't faced. My opponent didn't grow up in Johns Creek or in the district. There isn't really a voice for people like me, which is why I'm running to do that. The last thing is unity. I'm not going to run on any political extreme. I think polarization, as we see nationally and the state level, is really detrimental to getting things done. My goal is to work with and listen to both Democrats and Republicans to get the job done. And I stand against extremism, whether that's extremism around denying you the vote or extremism saying that democracy is something that we don't want. I want to make sure that we have that kind of space for conversations and decisions that are based on consensus, not just based on polarization.
Ashwin, if elected, you would be the first member of the Indian American and the Hindu American communities in the Georgia state legislature. So how important is diversity and representation, in government, and how do you plan to advocate for inclusion?
Yeah. One thing which we always which people learn about in schools, and it's a big ideal of our country, is that we're a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Government can only exist on the consent of the governed, and the system only works if every community has a seat at the table. So I think it's incredibly important to have representation in government. There are already existing barriers where certain people, certain types of folks can't run for office or can't be represented in a certain way, and that's detrimental to them because they don't have their voices at the table. So that's one reason why I decided to run too. We don't have a single Indian American in the entire state legislature, not just the state Senate, and same with Hindu American as well. But one thing to think about for diversity and inclusion is that even though I'm an Indian American, Hindu American, I'm not just representing that community. I am a voice, a new voice that understands that community, but it's equally important that I engage with other communities and make sure that I'm bringing their voices to the table as well. I don't plan to have, I don't plan to do the politics where it's like, it's us versus them, it's our community versus others. I think that's very harmful to democracy. I think showing an example for how can our communities work with other folks, and how my constituents are very diverse. They're not, Hindu Americans are only a small percentage of them, although that is where I come from. And I think the last thing I'll just note is other ways to advocate for inclusivity is we should really make working in the government a job that more people want to do. And part of that involves things like, can we pay our state employees more so that more people can do that work? Can we also think about campaign finance reform so that you don't have to be a multimillionaire just to have a chance to run? And it's partly what makes it so hard for young people to run. And finally, the last thing is, I think, being an example, being the first Gen Z member of the state Senate, if I win, is definitely going to bring more people into this space as well.
So what are your top priorities for the state, given the particularly, especially considering, the unique challenges that, as you mentioned, you are aware of in the 48th district?
Yeah, I would say 3 areas. One is education, 2, economy, and 3, public safety and well-being. So starting with education, I know that our district has really good public schools, which have helped me a ton. But over time, I've seen that we aren't investing enough in our education. We're not paying our teachers enough, and class sizes have been growing. The Hope Scholarship is no longer as over the years. It's been cut. There's not as many opportunities for students to do things as they could have done before. So I want to make sure that we make those long-term investments in education. I would note that Georgia has $11 billion surplus, which is a lot of money. And what that really means, and it's telling me, is that we're not really investing in the kinds of areas we need to in order to keep our state growing. So that's one part, is can we improve education, programs like dual enrollment, which I did when I was back in school or have been cut down a ton. We need to make sure we support both the people who are the most talented students, but also make sure that every student has the right access to education that they need. The second is the economy. We need to make sure we're attracting more jobs to the area. My background in entrepreneurship and technology can really help to make sure we're creating these new jobs here. And it really goes hand in hand with education. The nation has a cybersecurity job shortage. There's tons of jobs available, but not enough people to fill them because people aren't able to get these kinds of jobs. They don't have the right credentials or the right access to education. And even though they're among the highest paying jobs in IT. So I would really make sure that we're investing in those kinds of programs, but not just those. There's also jobs that we could create through clean energy, other things in transportation as well. There's a lot of different things we can do to encourage economic opportunity while making sure that no one is left behind. The final thing I'll also say is ensuring a public safety and well-being. What this means is things like we should pass common sense gun legislation. Everyone has Second Amendment right to own guns, but we don't want guns to go in the wrong hands. We want to make sure that our communities are safe. We should also expand Medicaid so that the people who are worst off in terms of healthcare are actually able to get the healthcare they need. There are these common sense things we can do just to make sure our communities are safer that I would really focus on as well.
So how do you plan to address the needs of, both the urban and rural communities within your district?
Yeah, I would note that our district is largely suburban, and it's very diverse. And I think thinking about kinds of the issues that we face here, I think one big issue is that there's a lot of folks need to commute to Atlanta in order to work, because that's way more of an urban community here. And what happens is that there's tons of traffic. You may have to end up driving for an hour or longer. It's a very tough drive.
I live here too. I'm in Alpharetta too.
Alpharetta too. Okay, great. So right? And I think one way to make that better is investing in more options. For example, making MARTA better and just improving the safety, the quality of that will really make sure we can have less congested roads. and things like that. And I think the other things we're also thinking about is just improving education, because we have like really good schools in Georgia Tech, UGA, et cetera, but they're quite far away from this district. And I think there's a lot we could do in terms of investing in our community colleges here, so we can better prepare students to have a better education. I think there's been a lot of competition for various kinds of schools, and it's often feels like a zero-sum game. Either I get into the school and I succeed, or I don't get in and I fail. And we want to make sure that our kids have that kind of opportunity regardless of where they are.
So we were talking, you sort of mentioned the gun control. So what is your stand about gun control?
Yeah, my stance is we have the Second Amendment, and it's really important to make sure that we do have the right to bear arms. And I'm all for law-abiding gun owners to responsibly have guns and use them for what they need. But we want to make sure that guns don't fall in the wrong hands. And we need to have some level of protection so that that doesn't happen. In Georgia, it's easier to get a driver's license, it's easier to get a gun than it is to get a driver's license in Georgia, which is kind of incredible. And I think we should change that. We should add some basic protections like basic background checks and things like that. Red flag laws to make sure that guns don't get into the hands of the wrong folks, and also make sure our campuses are safer by making sure that people just can't carry guns over there in general. But I think there's a way to strike a balance by which we respect that people have the right to have guns, but people need to be responsible with the guns.
Ashwin, on October 24, 2023, the Georgia Supreme Court ruled that the state's heartbeat abortion ban is constitutional and will remain in place. The 6-1 ruling rejected a lower court's reasoning that the 6-week abortion ban was unconstitutional. So what is your take on this?
Yeah, so I think, so in general, my position has been that I don't support the government controlling what women do with their bodies. I think it's really important to support women's right to choose. And the main reason here is that we don't want government to come and intrude on every single part of our family lives. I do think it's important to make sure we do want to encourage people to have families and have children, but the right way to do it, the right way to do it is not to go and force people to have children and then not give them the support they need. What we should really focus on is things like tax credits for people with children, making sure that families do have the kinds of opportunities that they have in general in order to support so that they can actually raise children successfully. So I would really make sure we should start focusing on those kinds of incentives to have families, as opposed to just heavy-handed things around abortion instead.
So Georgia is a very politically diverse state. And so how do you plan to work to represent Georgians whose political views are different than yours?
Yeah. So as I said before, my goal is to be someone who listens to everyone. That's the most important job of a public servant in public office, is to listen. And my goal is to always govern by consensus. I think what we've seen in our country, where half the people believe one way and the half the other way, and then one side just goes and does what they want, and then the other side completely hates it, it's not a recipe for success, because we can't have long-term success with those kinds of things. So my goal is to always build consensus, where anything I'm doing, I will listen to every side and make sure that our decision takes into account everyone's concerns. That's really my goal here. And I think a lot of that will involve, building a diverse team, making sure that I have people from across the district, but also people who understand what's happening throughout Georgia, not just in this district, and also making sure that we're intentionally reaching out to other communities which are different from the people I might usually talk with as well.
So as we mentioned earlier, Ashwin, if elected, you will be the first Gen Z, state senator in Georgia. So how do you plan to engage and represent the interests of younger voters in the state legislatures? And what initiatives or policies do you believe will resonate with the younger demographic in your district?
Yeah, I would note that it's very interesting about young voters and young people in general. Young people are very interested in politics, but there's much less avenues for them to get involved, which is why we see there's lots of protests. Almost most of the protest movements are young people play a very important role. And I know protests are really important in terms of challenging the status quo and talking about what's important. But I think my candidacy will definitely give an opportunity to think about, here are other ways to engage, where you can also work through the system. You don't have to just protest against the system. So I hope to give an alternative, which is here's one way you can concretely go and make change in this way. So one way which I plan to engage young voters is to, first of all, get younger people involved in the campaign, getting people at the schools, college students to think about, hey, I'm representing your interests as well, and here's a way you can really get involved and really shape a state Senate campaign. And then the other thing is that a lot of the issues that I am focusing on, they're especially important to young voters, but they're important for everyone because they're important for our futures. For example, sustainability. With the climate crisis, we need to make sure that our economy is grown sustainably and that we're working on clean energy, improving transportation infrastructure and public transit. All of these things are really important to young people and honestly everyone else as well. We want to make sure that there's public safety in general, things, as I mentioned, reproductive rights, expanding access to mental health services, counseling, all these things which are really important for young folks. And finally, making sure that young people continue to have a voice. I think one area where young people have become disillusioned with the system is when they see things like, oh, politician trying to overturn the election or creating restrictive voting laws that make it harder to vote, have your voice heard. So I'll make sure I fight for those kinds of things, and even things like preventing political gerrymandering, making sure we have an independent redistricting commission, and also just keeping our elections secure as well. So all of these issues, I hope, are areas where young people are already interested and engaged, and I'll provide a platform for them to really use the system in order to make sure their voices are heard.
Well, we are at the end of the interview. Do you want to make, just why should Georgia vote for you?
Yeah, vote for me because I'm a new voice who will make sure that I do listen to Georgians and put Georgians first. It's really important to make sure we do that kind of work. We can't just have people who take what's politically expedient. We need people to do the right thing.
Well, thank you, Ashwin. Thank you so much for talking to us, and we wish you all the best in all of your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Jyotsna.
Absolutely.